Welcome back, guys. If you were listening to chapter 1 yesterday, then you know where we left off. I can see there are a whole 2 of you here, so chances are you were the 2 who stuck with me to the end yesterday. If not, on my channel, there's a playlist called Readaloud. I might have called it Breadcrumbs. I'll make sure I double check that after this so you can get caught up, or you can just join in today. The chat should be working. Be cool. Hey, Madison. So I know at least one of you who is here. I can't see Trotwood usernames, or I can't see Trotwood emails when they're logged in, so I don't know how many and who exactly you are, except now I can see 2 Madisons. If the chat turns into an issue, I will lock it down. You know the drill. However, I think it should be cool. The other cool thing I want to tell you is that I reached out to the author of Breadcrumbs, Ursu. And not only was she super sweet, but she said if you guys had any questions at all about the book or just any questions you wanted to ask her, to let me know, and I would pass them along to her. That said, for today, let's dive into Chapter 2 of Breadcrumbs. Any questions before we get started? Let's go. Chapter 2, Fairy Tales. When it was finally time for recess, Hazel burst out of her seat and flew to her jacket, accidentally bumping into Michaela with such force she sent a pink highlighter clattering down the hallway. Hazel ran past the doorway where Mrs. Jacobs stood and out into the white fields where Mr. Williams' class already roamed in their winter puffiness. The snow had stopped coming down now, but the ground was thick with it, and half the 5th graders of Lovelace Elementary hurled themselves into it while the other half lifted their feet in and out of it warily, like they were treading on some hostile alien moon. And then there was Jack, waiting for her by the big slide, as he almost always was. Every few days he'd go play capture the flag or football with Bobby and Tyler and the other boys to keep them from getting sulky. Hazel was okay with that. She'd sit and read. He'd always come back. "Hey," he said, grinning as she ran to him. "Have you recovered from my devious snowball attack?" "Didn't even feel it," chirped Hazel. "Gotta work on your arm strength." "Not me," said Jack, molding a snowball in his hands. "You're pitching today." He didn't have to say anything else. Hazel took the snowball and moved back. Jack had moved in next door when she was 6. She'd liked him right away because he replaced the girl who'd lived there before, a 4-year-old who was always trying to convince Hazel to come to her tea parties, where no talking was allowed. Plus, he was wearing an eye patch. Hazel's 6-year-old self was super disappointed when she found out that he didn't actually need one, but she quickly learned it was wearing one that really mattered. This was a secret truth about the world, one they both understood. Jack was the only person she knew with an imagination, at least a real one. The only tea parties he'd have were ones in Wonderland, or the Arctic, or in the darkest reaches of space. He was the only person who saw things for what they could be instead of just what they were. He saw what lived beyond the edges of the things your eyes took in. And though they eventually grew out of Wonderland Arctic space people tea parties, the essential thing remained the same. Hazel fit with Jack. Today they were playing superhero baseball, which was a variation Jack had invented on the theory that superheroes too needed organized sports. The trick was they had to hide their superpowers, which is hard when you're so awesome at baseball. Hazel was pitching snowballs, trying to keep her fastball from breaking a hole in the space-time continuum, while Jack hit the ball and jogged stiffly around the bases, pretending he ran like a man who had not been bitten by a radioactive mosquito. "I got a new character for you," Jack said, whiffing at a snowball with his stick. "You do?" Hazel let her arm fall to her side and took a step forward. "Can I see?" Jack was the best artist in the whole 5th grade. He'd been drawing ever since Hazel knew him, and for his birthday last year, she'd gotten him this big, fancy black sketchbook. He'd been using it to make up superheroes recently. Eventually, he was going to make his own comic book, and Hazel was the only one who knew anything about it. "Nah, not outside. I'll show you on the bus. I was going to show you this morning, but you were too busy recovering from my snowball assault to get to the bus stop on time." "Cool," Hazel said. "Can you tell me anything?" "This one's a bad guy," Jack said. "They're more fun, you know." "What's he do?" "I'll tell you later. Come on, are you pitching or what?" "Sorry," Hazel said, taking a step back. "I'm going to throw a superhero curve now." "Yeah, I gotta learn to hit the curve if I'm going to be a baseball player when I grow up." This was new. "What about comic books?" "Oh, that too. I can do both. You can't play baseball forever. I'm going to hit 900 home runs and get into the Hall of Fame. 900 home runs? Is that a lot? Jack's eyes widened. Is that a lot? No one's ever done that before, not even guys who cheated. Or I could hit 400 a couple times, that would do the trick. I'm going to be a great hitting catcher like Joe Mauer. Hazel just nodded and packed snowballs. She liked baseball, but Jack had the statistics of every player memorized, and that was just not good conversation in her opinion. Jack had even made imaginary stats for the superhero game. Batman oddly had a lot of strikeouts. Hazel wound up and pitched, and Jack smacked the snowball with the stick. It exploded into a jillion pieces. Oops, super strength, Jack said, wiping the snow off his face. Hazel lobbed a snowball at him. Superhero baseball turns evil, she called. Are you guys going out? Hazel whirled around. Michaela and Molly were standing just behind her. Are you guys going out? Molly repeated, her voice low and conspiratorial. She looked from Hazel to Jack, to the snowballs, to the stick, and she raised her eyebrows. At Lovelace Elementary, boys and girls who were together were going out. At her old school, they were just going or going with, but at that point, it wasn't something people actually did, just talked about a lot. Then it was okay for boys and girls to hang out together, but here none of the rest of the boys and girls did unless they were together, in which case they stood near each other sometimes. Someone asked Hazel this every once in a while, and she thought sometimes she should say yes, and then everyone would think she was the sort of person that someone might like to go out with, and that would be something. But she didn't want anyone to think it, not really. Jack was her best friend, and there was a time when everyone understood that, but they didn't anymore, because apparently when you get to be a certain age, you're just supposed to wake up one morning and not want to be best friends with your best friend anymore, just because he's a boy and you don't have a messenger bag. Hazel cast a glance at Jack, who was looking at her questioningly, his superhero bat dangling at his side, and then she straightened and tossed her black hair. Molly, she said, you're a goon. From the superhero batter's box came the sound of Jack cracking up. Hazel smiled. The girls' faces were identical masks of affront, because it was certainly bad enough to be called names when you were just innocently trying to be obnoxious, but far worse to be called something that, just an hour earlier, you had specifically established as dorky. They shook their heads and then turned and walked away. Thwack. Jack, Hazel shouted, grabbing her shoulder where the snowball had hit. The bell rang. Jack and Hazel fell in next to each other as they moved their way back into school, just a little separate from everyone else. So you want to go sledding after school? Jack asked. Yeah, said Hazel, but you gotta show me your drawing first. Promise, said Jack, on the bus. Hazel felt her heart lift. Jack usually sat in the back with the boys. It wasn't until Hazel walked out of school and saw her mother's car parked across the street that she remembered that she wasn't going to be riding on the bus at all today. She had forgotten all about the plans her mother had made for her and placed them in the box in her mind where things like take out the trash and do the dishes used to go, back when it was okay to forget about those things. Jack, I forgot. Mom's making me go with her somewhere. I can't go sledding. Jack frowned. Bummer. Yeah, Hazel said, eyeing him. He would never come out and say that he didn't want to go home, but she knew. Can we go tomorrow? Cool, said Jack. They said goodbye, and Hazel grumbled her way to the car. Hi, dear, her mother said brightly. How was your day? Well, Tyler called her Crazy Hazy again, and she was really late, and Mrs. Jacobs wrote something in her book, and people snickered at her, and you can't say goon, and Molly's going to hate her now, and she didn't get to ride home on the bus, and Jack, to make it all okay, and he wanted to go sledding with her so he didn't have to go home, and she's abandoning him even though he's her best friend, and he isn't even supposed to do that ever, ever, ever. It was okay, Hazel said. Hazel could sense the familiar feeling of her mother's eyes on her. She looked ahead impassively. Well, you'll have fun with Adelaide today, her mother said. Hazel sighed. She used to play with Adelaide when they were little. There were pictures of the two of them splashing around the Linden Hills kiddie pool in matching arm floaties. But then the Briggses left the country for 4 years, and when they came back, neither girl wore floaties anymore. Adelaide liked making bead jewelry and putting nail polish on dolls. Hazel was into pirates. There was no compromise to be had. I haven't seen her in 2 years, Hazel said. Give her a chance, Hazel. Hazel looked at the dashboard. Her mom didn't understand. She was perfectly willing to give everyone and everything a chance. It's just that no one wanted to give her one. They drove over to the Briggs' house slowly. The snow had stopped falling, but cars still inched carefully along the unplowed streets. Hazel's mom drove their car like it was an emotionally unstable bear. The Briggses lived far from the blocks made up of rows of single-story houses plopped on top of placemat yards where Hazel lived. There was nothing uneasy about the houses along this drive. They wore their second and third stories with assurance. No one had to dream up shutters and window boxes and trim, or porches and turrets and wide curving staircases. The snow covered the houses here, too, but where in Hazel's neighborhood it let the ordinary borrow magic from it, these houses seemed to be lending their power to the snow. The Briggses lived on one of the lakes that lay in the heart of the city like a chain of jewels. There was an ice rink on it, complete with hockey boards and lights and a warming house, and as Hazel peered out her car window, she saw families in matched sets sailing around the rink. She must have been the only girl in all of Minneapolis who didn't know how to skate. The Briggs' house perched on top of a small hill across from the lake, its red brick glowing against the white snow. It looked like the size of Hazel's house and Jack's, and one or two more put together. It made Hazel's house look like a toy built from a cheap kit. "Ready?" asked her mother as they parked. "Sure," said Hazel. The big dark wood front door had an iron knocker on it, the kind you'd expect Dracula to have, and Hazel tried to reach up for it. Her mom rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's just decoration," she whispered, pressing the doorbell. And then Adelaide's mother was opening the door, and she smiled at Hazel, and Hazel was struck by how easy a thing it seemed for her to do. "Hazel," she said, "you're all grown up. Come on in. Addie will be so happy to see you." Hazel took a breath before she entered, because it seemed like the sort of thing you should do. Inside, the house was all color and brightness and matching sets, the kind that had furniture that was just for decoration. And the smell. "Elizabeth," her mother asked, "are you making cookies?" "Not me," Adelaide's mom said. She led them into the kitchen where Adelaide sat at a table tapping a pencil against a notebook. Hazel hadn't seen Adelaide in 2 years. Her dark hair had curled up and now hung around her face in tantalizing sproings. She had magenta horn-rimmed glasses that were probably very cool, although Hazel was no arbiter of such things. The kitchen around her, which was as big as Hazel's living room, looked like the sort of kitchen you see on TV, all matching and gleamy, like Adelaide. "Hi," Hazel said. "Hi," Adelaide said, gleaming. "I was just doing math homework." She motioned to the textbook in front of her. "I've got so much." "Oh," said Hazel. She looked down at Adelaide's textbook. She didn't recognize it. "Work on following the rules. I probably can't help you." "That's okay," Adelaide said, leaning in like she was telling a secret. "I can't help me either." "I don't want to keep you," Hazel said, shifting. "Oh, don't be a goof." Adelaide shut the book. "Come on, sit down." Goof. Hazel blinked. "Okay." She crossed the kitchen and sat down on the cushioned oak chair next to Adelaide. "What, I'm not here?" a male voice asked. Hazel turned. Adelaide's kitchen was big enough that if there was a man taking cookies out of the oven, you might not immediately notice, which in this case there was. The man smiled at Hazel. He was roughly parent age and tall, with a poof of brown hair and sparkly gray eyes. He looked like the sort of person who might hand you an invitation to a wizard school. "I'm Adelaide's uncle. You can call me Martin." Hazel couldn't take it all in, the kitchen, the gleaming, the uncle in the apron. This was the universe that everyone else lived in. She wanted to ask Adelaide to explain this place to her, to explain the rules, to show her the potion you had to drink to fit in here, but all she could say was, "Your uncle makes cookies." He shrugged. "They're from a tube." "Uncle Martin's a screenwriter," Adelaide said. "That means he writes movies, but he can't sell them, so he's freeloading on my parents." "That's right," her uncle said cheerfully. "But I make excellent tube cookies. I think it more than makes up for any freeloading." "We're writing a story together," Adelaide told Hazel, eyes serious. "Yes," said Uncle Martin. "Addie is going to make it up, and then I'm going to steal it and sell it for $1 jillion, and then who will be freeloading upon whom? But I will certainly put her name in the ed credits. And yours, Miss, Hazel." "What a lovely name," he said, nodding appreciatively. "Very heroic." "Really?" Hazel said. He turned to Adelaide and said, "Isn't that Lee Scoresby's demon's name?" "No, that's Hester." Adelaide looked at Hazel. "Have you read The Golden Compass?" "Like 1,000 times." "Yeah," said Hazel. "What do you think your daemon would be?" Hazel paused a moment as if she hadn't already thought about this very carefully. "A cat," she said, because that was a normal thing to say. "Really? I think it would be like an owl." "Really?" Hazel asked. Mine is a slug, said Uncle Martin. Now, Hazel, tell me your life story, from the beginning until you met me. Hazel's adopted, offered Adelaide, from India. Hazel blinked again and looked from Adelaide to her wizard school slug demon uncle. It wasn't the sort of thing that people usually came out and said. Really, Martin said, I want to go there someday off my screenwriting riches. Do you remember it at all? Hazel bit her lip. She supposed this was the sort of thing that people with decorative furniture did. They just said things because their houses had enough room for all kinds of things, no matter how odd and funny shaped they were. No, she said, I was just a baby. You should go back when you're older. It could be a quest, heroic Hazel. He nodded at her. Now, Addie, tell Hazel the story I'm going to steal. Adelaide nodded, her curls springing a little. Okay, she said, leaning across the table toward Hazel. There's a witch who lives wherever it's winter. We're starting with the villain, Martin interjected, because they're the most fun. Do you want to help, Hazel? She did. Adelaide looked at her expectantly. The witch travels on a sleigh pulled by huge white wolves, Hazel began. This wasn't original. She tried again. The wolves have mouths as red as blood. The snowflakes follow her like bees. She glanced at Adelaide, who nodded earnestly. Uncle Martin smiled. Like bees, very evocative. Now, Adelaide, what does she wear? A white dress and white furs, Adelaide said, and she has a crown made of the thinnest of ice. Because she's a queen, Hazel said. She's the Snow Queen. Yes, nice. Where does she live? In a palace of ice, said Hazel, and she has a heart to match. Very good. He looked at the two of them seriously. And what does she want? Hazel and Adelaide exchanged a confused look. What do you mean? Adelaide asked. Everyone in a story wants something, he said, especially the villains, and the hero's job is to stop them from getting it. So, what does she want? Eternal winter? Said Adelaide. Kids, said Hazel. She wants kids. She wants to collect them. She puts them in snow globes. She traps them with promises, and if she can get them to agree to stay there forever, they're hers. The words came tumbling out of her mouth, and once they were out there, she could only look from Martin to Adelaide in horror. This was the sort of thing she was not supposed to say out loud. But Martin just turned to Hazel and nodded slowly. Very good, he said. You get a tube cookie. You too, Addie. But why? Adelaide asked, looking from her uncle to Hazel. The kids. Why would they agree to stay? Why would anyone stay with her? Martin stopped and regarded Hazel and Adelaide. Yes, he said slowly. Why? That's the question. Hazel heard the sound of throat clearing. She hadn't noticed the two mothers step into the room. Her mom was looking at Adelaide's meaningfully, and Hazel knew that she had spent the last 10 minutes talking about her. See how she is? Marty, Adelaide's mother warned, you'll give them nightmares. Come on, Lizzie, he shook his head dismissively. Kids can handle a lot more than you think they can. It's when they get to be grown up that you have to start worrying. Adelaide smiled smugly at Hazel, and it was a sort of smile that invited her to smile smugly back, which she did. So, did you have fun? Her mom asked as they drove off. She did. It was okay, Hazel said. We can go over to Adelaide's any time you want. I don't get to see Elizabeth much. It's nice for me. Maybe on the weekends? Maybe, Hazel said. Weekends were for her and Jack. She needed to be there if he needed her. They drove home on newly plowed streets, which their little car tackled eagerly. Hazel stared out of the window and watched the houses shrink and thought of villains and snow globes and what it would be like to be trapped inside. When they pulled into the driveway, Hazel cast a glance over to Jack's house. It was dark. She wondered if he'd been able to make plans, if he was still out, or if he was up in his room, drawing or reading comic books, or making up superhero baseball stats with the shades drawn and the door closed. She wished he had a place to put all his funny-looking things. Her heart panged. She was supposed to be with him, not eating tube cookies and speaking in fairy tales. She was his best friend. She would do better. Tomorrow. Next up is Chapter 3, so we're going to pause for today. To answer questions in chat, no, there are no questions assigned to this book. This is just for fun reading. I hope that you guys are still reading just for fun at home on your own too, so let me know whatever you're reading about. But no, don't think of this as an assignment. This is just something that we can keep doing. If you have questions, though, the author told me that she would answer any questions that you guys had. So if you have a question, write it down, send it to me in an email, let me know. Leave a comment, I guess, and I'll see it. Anything else before we go for today? Hey, Shania. Jellyfish. Hey, all right, so if there are no more questions for now, then I will see you guys tomorrow. If you have a preference for earlier in the day or later in the day, let me know either on Google Classroom or send me an email. I know the author because I emailed her to ask her if I could read this book, and she said that would be fine by her. And she told me as well that if you guys had questions, she would answer them. Plus, I know her because when she was writing books back when I was still in middle school, so I used to read books that she wrote, but this is my first time reading Breadcrumbs along with you. All right, guys, I'm going to close this up for now, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Remember, if you need anything, reach out, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.